Hello everyone, this is Chase Pounds. In today's video, I'm going to be discussing about reviewing a book that I've been reading called The Origins of Our Discontent by Isabel Wilkerson. Now, I haven't really finished complete reading this book, and it's mainly because I've been mostly kind of tired in the evenings after work to really read it, and I usually fall asleep, kind of doze off reading this book. But yes, and it's because mainly because I wake up around if you want to know, I usually wake up around 6 a.m. in the morning, which I kind of don't really favor, maybe because my job, but but I usually tired in the evening to try sometimes read it, so that's why I kind of been behind reading. I'm doing this video right now, reviewing it because it's due back on Tuesday. So I was what I originally planned was when I was finished reading this book that I would do a review on it, on my thoughts on it. But I might as well do it now since this may be my last time having to renew this book. I've renewed it several times because I've been behind in reading it. But the book is by this author who studies the caste systems of both of three different countries in different eras. Well, one being here in the United States, with her history of the caste system in the United States, or she studies particularly. And make this clear that she studies the caste system in the United States of segregation during the Jim Crow era, of the caste system of Anglo-Saxon white Americans, and which she calls the dominant caste, which is the white Anglo-Saxons, white Americans, and the subordinate caste, which is mostly minorities such as black Americans, mainly black Americans she talks about in this book. And the era of segregation, particularly in the Deep South, where during the Jim Crow era, where things were very segregated, era where blacks were kept down not only based on segregation of where they could and could not go, but also economic opportunities, poverty, as well as acts of violence such as lynchings, as well as even today's society. She studies the issues of police brutality and racial profiling and how it affects the subordinate caste. Analyzes different I guess takes and scenarios of different racial issues. Then she also studies what she says in her book that the caste system. She studies the caste system in India, which she finds very parallel to the segregation of Jim Crow in the United States during in the past centuries. And she also studies the caste system during the Holocaust, during World War II, with the Germans and the Jews, when they were put in place in the camps. And in a lot of them, she says, they adopted some of the feudal caste systems of the United States from slavery in the United States. She also analyzes events in slavery. And she claims that some of the that Nazis during World War II, in Nazi Germany, they adopted some of the caste systems in the United States, used it as a way of dividing, as well as creating a caste system for what they call the Aryan race, the perfect Aryan race. That's how the Germans saw themselves at the time. Often, some of you may heard that they believed that the perfect Germans were the blue-eyed, blonde-haired Aryan race, while the Jews were kind of the subordinate caste, just like the African Americans were the subordinate caste. Yes, and she also talks in the very beginning of the book some of the things I could understand well, and it made sense that I was kind of taught this maybe in my classes in school, about race, what's considered white, what's considered black. And she says race is a social construct that we've been taught is not really an actual, how I should say this, is race isn't someone based on skin color or ethnicity. It's something that's been constructed, I guess, in the past centuries by Europeanism. I think it's a way of saying it, because ever since I guess white Anglo-Saxon, white Europeans who conquered and controlled Western society, they, I guess, came up with the concept of race, making them the more dominant, and setting up a boundary of them being considered dominant, in the subordinate caste, whether it be black, whether it be indigenous people or other races, as being the more subordinate caste. And it also talks about the ethnic groups that immigrated here to the United States. And I kind of mentioned this in my other video. Some of you may not have seen it, or some may have took the time to see it. The Irish, when I talked about the Irish ethnic groups, as well as the case with the same when later ethnic groups such as the Italians, the Jews, Polish came to the United States. By today's standard, we may look at them as, to some people, as all white American, but when they first came to this country, they were kind of a subordinate caste of their own. They were considered inferior to the white Anglo-Saxon race. And they dealt with the discrimination. They lived in poverty, just like as African Americans lived in the ghettos. They lived in what they call slums and ghettos as well. Or in African Americans, we would call them, they may live in the projects as well. And I guess over time it took them, I guess, to be accepted as white Americans, and some of them also adopted the same hatred and exclusion that the Anglo-Saxons had adopted and put on them. So now they did it to all the other ethnic groups, excluding, trying to rise up against, and not trying to level themselves with the lower races, such as African Americans, which are considered more, to mainstream societies, more dominant. I mean, not dominant. I mean the more inferior, the more subordinate caste, as she puts in this book. One thing that also I think made sense was how at the beginning of the book, I was going to try to quote some of what she was saying. It was where she mentions about an African, a lady who's not African American, but she's straight African, who came to the United States. I guess she came to the UK and the United States, and she was I guess maybe appalled, or maybe thought it was awkward how they look at things black and white, because over in her country, in Africa, they don't see race like we do. They don't define things based on black and white. They just see themselves as people, human beings. And it kind of shows you that, I guess, here in the United States, everything is more based on race, more based on what's black and white. And that kind of determines your level in society, and dictates your way of life, what type of occupation you have, where you live, and what area you live in, or how you act, how you conduct yourself, if you're considered trustworthy or irresponsible. That's how, I guess, in the United States as well, maybe in the UK, the race, I often hear that race over in Europe is a little different. Race and racism is different over in Europe compared to the United States, though in England they had their own issues of race from what I know, race and racism over there as well. But it's then they had slavery over in England as well, though their slavery ended quick earlier than ours, which says something about us, but how we were, I guess, so reluctant to end slavery and contempt with slavery and its profiting. Excuse me, I thought I heard something, but he also talks about events in the past year with the election with the past presidency we had with the former president we had, about how it impacted and kind of instigated a lot of racial issues. That I guess the research, racism didn't really ever die even before Barack Obama's presidency, or President 45's presidency, but I think the last presidency kind of did instigate a resurgence in violence and hatred against minority groups, and made more of a dividing power as well as political parties, political aspects as well. Though it doesn't mention even the recent events of in the Capitol, the riots in the Capitol, or the January 6th insurrection they called it, but it does talk about past. It does talk about events between the 2016 election, between 2000 up to 2000. This book was published in 2020. It talks about current events all the way up to the COVID-19 pandemic, and how that some kind of played a role in, I guess. He even talks about the Ebola crisis in 2014, how that played a part, I guess, in scapegoating with certain countries, ethnic countries, and third world countries. And also in the book, it makes a notable account about the person who it's kind of relevant to the times we're living in now, with COVID-19 cases starting to spike up again, as well as a new variant of monkeypox that's starting to spread. A new virus called monkeypox that's starting to spread. And it mentions in the book that back in the smallpox outbreak, it mentions the 1721 smallpox outbreak in Boston. It mentions the notable person that came up with the vaccine of smallpox, that got the idea of inoculating a person of inoculation, and coming up coming up with the idea for a vaccine. The concept of inoculation was invented by an African slave, because there was a custom in his country, in Africa, of inoculation, of helping stop the spread of disease. Yet most people were reluctant to try his method of inoculation, and most whites really frowned or were against it. I guess mainly because of racial attitudes and lack of understanding of African culture, and just simply being prejudiced because of that time period. But it turns out that his method turned out to be potent and would help stop the outbreak of the 1721 smallpox outbreak. And with its effect will also help this system of inoculation, then coming to the vaccine, will help in later decades stop the spread of smallpox, eradicate it for good later decades, which will be, if you were familiar with medical history, you would know that smallpox was eradicated about 1979, 1980 with a mass vaccination campaign where they came up with a strategy of going to third world countries where it was mostly at that time in the 70s where smallpox was still prevalent and still remained a danger to other Western countries, westernized, developed civilized countries, Western developed countries. And they came up with and they successfully vaccinated people who had known to have or thought to be having carry smallpox, and it proved to be successful and eradicate smallpox for good. And they, all thanks to this person going back to 1721 who came up with a idea of inoculation, and people took that idea and used it to stop the outbreak. But yet he doesn't get much credit, again because of a slave. And of course, white people tend to want to get credit for their own ideas, their own methods they adopted. But there was also mentioned this documentary, another history's mystery documentary that talks about smallpox, but it mentions little about it. It kind of mentions about the slave, but doesn't mention his credit for coming up with the idea of inoculation. But the white person that borrowed the idea from his slave, he tested the he did the inoculation on his slaves and people in his household as a test, I guess, see if the concept would work, and it did. And the book also represents the novel historical tragedies such as the Black Wall Street Massacre. This book also represents the 1921 Tulsa Massacre, known as Black Wall Street, as well as the other it doesn't mention Rosewood. Oddly, it doesn't mention the Florida Massacre in Rosewood, but it did mention another massacre that I just learned about on the internet from another YouTube video called the Ocoee Massacre, which was also in Florida, and that was during around the year of a 10th election in 1920, and that was also a tragic, deadly massacre, and it's also not very known about. And so it kind of mentions about how when black people try to be successful, the white man tries to stop them from being successful and severely punishing for them for, I guess, either stepping out of their place or getting too uppity or trying to outdo trying to compete with white people, which to white folks in that time that was a no-no a no-no where you couldn't do that. You had to stay in your place to survive, and just let them treat you the way they did, which wasn't right, but that's how society was at the time. And it also mentions an incident going back to the 1890s, and this is something I wasn't really familiar with. There was a riot over at a black-owned successful grocery store, and white people, I guess, were jealous about it. But it was an incident where a boy was arguing with a black boy was arguing with a white boy. The white boy told his father, and that's what started a confrontation, and that's what resulted in an explosive, I guess, riot or massacre, where they caught the black store owners and shot and killed them. I think it said they were hanged as well in a famous black lady at the time. Her name was Isabel Wells. who I guess was a prominent African lady who would go into Deep South, I guess observing lynchings and issues in the South with lynching. Of course, it says in the book, the wake in the country of this terror lynch, I guess, spread the news of the ills and the horrors of lynching in the Deep South, which was during the turn of the century was at its height. It was rising, and that was a tragedy that I'm not really familiar with. Was this 1892 case? And so this I haven't really finished reading the book, but I kind of mentioned some of the things that occurred in the book. And again, it talks about the caste system. It analyzes both the caste system in India. It observes the caste system in India, which is kind of similar to the United States, where they have a lower caste system known as the untouchables. And they're kind of like the African Americans in the United States, who I guess even today are considered the lowest or subordinate caste of the society, while the dominant caste or the elite, they're in control of everything. They control what is said and done, as well. Like here in the United States, where the white Anglo-Saxon dominant races in control of our country and what's being said and done as well, and affecting the outcome of how minorities, how the lowest caste system is to conduct themselves, and how they don't have a say in power. Well, much of a say in power. Some may have a little say in power, but how it has effects and controls one. They have effect and control one way or another for the most part. And it's an interesting read, and it made Oprah Winfrey's book club. Feel free to. I recommend a book to read. I'm gonna try and finish reading this book as much as I can, because I only have a few days to really finish reading this, and I kind of in the middle of reading this book. But this is another video by Chase Pounds. Feel free to comment on this subject. Stay tuned for my next video.